Okay, so we haven't finished any of our other projects, but we figured it'd be a good time to start a new one. We're not really that smart, but whatever. So we got a 2019 Corvette here. It's a Grand Sport. Supposedly it makes 450 or 60 horsepower, and that's not enough. So we're gonna go ahead and put a Magnuson supercharger on. Let's get started. So when you order the 2650 kit from Magnuson, it's going to show up in these two boxes. Why don't we go ahead, throw it all on the bench, and we'll go through everything that's involved. All right, so we got everything out of the boxes. Let's go ahead and go over piece by piece what you get in the kit. First, you have the throttle body adapter here, a couple pulleys, one for the blower, one for the crank. You have your air inlet tube, RTD, this is what you're gonna use to flash the computer. Here's your heat exchanger. You have an upper and a lower, the lower still in the box. Come to the supercharger. Now this is a larger supercharger than we put on my 06. That was a 2300 if you remember. This is a 2650. So it's much larger, but in order to fit this big blower inside this small little engine bay, we have to change the design around. So this blower sits down in the valley of the engine and it blows upward, comes out like this, down into two intercoolers and then down into the motor. Where if you remember on the 06 over there, it starts in the top and it blows down through an intercooler core and then back up and down into the motor. A little bit different of a design, but that's the only way to pack these big old blowers in these small little engine bays. Next, we have a license plate frame and the instructions. Following down the line, you have some stickers and random clamps for the hoses, the electrical connections for the heat exchanger pump. Following down, these are the brackets you need to remove the coils off of the valve covers on the LS motor so they move down further since we have these intercoolers there now. You have the coolant pump and the little tank for the heat exchanger. Gates belt, which is pretty awesome that they throw these in. I know on other kits, I always find myself going to buy these after. So a little bit of expense you don't need to spend. You have your idler pulleys and the pulleys we're gonna add to the front end of this engine. Bracket here, miscellaneous hoses, and again, some smaller little clamps and whatnot. So that's everything that you're gonna get when you order this kit. Enough talking and looking at it, let's start putting it on the car. All right, so this car only has 9,000 miles on it, pretty much perfect. We don't want anything bad to happen. We're gonna do things a little bit out of order. We skipped ahead to step 157, and we're gonna pull the front bumper off first, just so we have one less thing that can get damaged, scratched, from a buckle on your jeans or anything like that. So we pulled the wheels off. Now we're gonna go ahead and pull the two inner fender wells, and we can get to some bolts back here to pull that bumper off. Let's go ahead and do it. So now we went and got all the bolts out all the way around. We need to pull this trim piece right here on the back of the wheel well off. There's a couple more 7mm screws back here. So it's got some push clips. Just go ahead and pull on them and it'll come out. There you go. So we got it off. As you can see here, a couple clips up the edge you need to pull and then one bolt on the bottom and that thing will come out. Now we can get access to these couple screws here and we can start pulling that inner fender well. So there you go. As you can see, we have the inner fender out. Now we're gonna go ahead and do the same to the other side so we can pull this front bumper off. So now we have all the bolts up here taken out so we could gain access to each side to pull the fender wells. We're gonna come back here and do the 5 and pull this whole entire thing right off. Make sure when you go ahead to pull the front bumper off, there's these 4 bolts or screws that come up from the bottom. Those will keep it in place and you will not be able to get it off. Ask me how I know. Earlier in this video for you, it would have been yesterday for us, we went and pulled the front bumper off of this Corvette, and now we're gonna start under the hood. As you can see, we pulled the little hydraulic struts here off of the hood, and there's one per side, one on the driver's side, one on the passenger, and I took a wooden stick here that we cut to length. It goes into the hood hinge down here on the bottom, and up here I just dropped a screw into it so it can't slip out of the hood latch. So that's perfect. Now we can move it side to side if needed, but it's just real quick and easy to make sure that hood stays up and we can get some of the air intake pieces out of here to continue on with this blower project. Make sure you have a nice set of fender covers. I went and bought these brand new just for this project. I don't want any scratches or anything underneath, as this car is really nice and new, like we said before. Next, we're gonna go ahead and pull these Corvette covers off. This is the last time they're ever gonna be on this motor, so hope you like how they looked. That's one. We'll go ahead and get the other side now. Gone.
All right, so moving forward, now it's time to remove the clean air tube, which you can see here. There's one clamp up at the throttle body and another clamp down at the airbox there on the mass airflow tube. So what you want to do is undo both of those clamps and you can pull that thing out of the way. We're going to retain the factory airbox itself, so that part doesn't need to come off, just this piece you can see here. Now that that's out of the way, we're going to move forward and disconnect the mass airflow sensor and pull that off out of the way. There's an extension harness that goes in here. Now we move ahead to the driver's side valve cover area, and we're going to start pulling some of the wiring off of there. And down to the throttle body itself, we're going to disconnect the wiring connections on that. There's one wiring harness here right on the front of the driver's side cylinder head. We're going to pull that out of the way so we have some of the slack in this harness. And now with our Christmas tree tool, we just want to pop up all of those little Christmas tree plugs that go down that valve cover. You can see here, that wiring harness is going to have to move out of the way. So we disconnect the coils here. And that'll give us just enough little slack that we can pull that thing up and over. Once that's done, we move to the passenger side, pulling off these clips. And once again, we pull those Christmas trees out of there. I did switch it up to a pair of angled needle nose pliers, and that seemed to work a little bit better, just the 90-degree angle as you can see here. So as you can see, it's still a little bit tight, but we'll have enough slack there to get it out of the way. Now there's 4 of these little pins that used to hold that Corvette beauty plate on. Pull those up and out of the way. And we move on to the PCV valve. So the PCV valve goes from the throttle body there down toward the valley of the engine. Takes a 24mm socket, and you can just spin that thing out as you see right here. Now we're going to move ahead and pull the intake manifold off. So what you want to do, you'll have to use a universal back there to get underneath that cowling. I'll throw a diagram up here that shows you how many bolts they are. And now the biggest pain of getting this thing off was there's a little clip there that you need to push toward the front of the car on the hose in the back. Again, I'll throw a little picture up right here so you can see what part it is that we're talking about. What I did was put a screwdriver right where my finger is and kind of pry against that cowling. I just put a rag on that so I didn't mar it up any. And then you can push the tab in, and while that tab is depressed, you can pull it out. And we're ready to take the intake manifold itself off now and move on to the coil covers. So there's a couple little bolts there, pull those out of the way. Now you can see your coil. So what you want to do is pull the spark plug wire out of the bottom, just kind of twist it a little bit, that'll pop down, and then you can see there's 2 bolts per coil. We're going to take our socket and pull those out, move those up and out of the way. Now it sure doesn't matter, but I like to take things off and put them back in the same place that they were. So what we're going to do is set them down so that we know which coil was on which cylinder, and I'll put them back on that way. And last but not least, we'll pull these last 2 off here on the driver's side. Perfect. We'll do the same thing over on the passenger.
Now that we have the valve covers modified, we're going to go ahead and modify this PCV right here. So you remember earlier in the video, we took the PCV out of here when we had the intake manifold still on. It was the 24mm socket. So that threads out of this hole here. They give you this little tool, which is a threaded rod. Kind of, maybe some of them are a bolt or whatever. So there's a little spacer in the end of this that's not threaded currently. We're going to jam this thing in this way. Once it's jammed in, we're going to put this little spacer right here on, and then we're going to put this nut, and we're going to tighten up the nut by finger. Start heating this up with a heat gun so that it warms up the Loctite that's holding that little spacer in, and we're going to drive that spacer out using this bolt, or this nut I mean. It's going to pull against, and it's going to pull that thing right out of there. So let's go ahead and get this done. There you go, this one broke free. I can see it spinning in there. So we're going to put the spacer now. We're going to slide the nut. Now you need to make sure that this spacer is perfectly centered on this, so when you start extracting that other one, it's going to go down the middle. If this isn't sitting in the center, it won't come out. So there you go. That's the spacer right there that you're trying to get off. You can see what we did. We just threaded this inside. This one started spinning. If it didn't spin, you heat it up with a heat gun and you can extract it out. Same thing we just did. Okay, so now that we have this plug pulled out, we need to cap this big port off. So they give you this supplied fitting in the kit and some of this lubricant for the O-ring. We're just going to put a little bit of the lubricant on that O-ring and then thread this thing down into that bore. There you go. Now we're gonna go through and wipe the excess off the top just so it looks all nice. There you go. And now we will go and put a little nipple into that plug that we pulled out here. You're gonna use a little bit of green Loctite on that. All right, so here's our little nipple here. This is gonna get put into the end here. You're gonna put a little bit of the retaining compound on here. It's the green Loctite. So just kinda, you don't need a whole ton, just spread it around like that. Okay, so you got green Loctite on there. We're gonna set this into the end with your fingers, and then you just wanna lightly tap it in, and it should bottom out. There you go. You can hear the sound change there, so that's all the way seated. Again, grab a little cloth. I'm just using some Kleenex. Wipe all the excess off so you do a nice clean job. Okay, so now we're gonna pull the fuel line here so we can get this wiring harness underneath it and tuck it down. They give you this little blue tool provided. So what you do is snap it around the fuel line. It springs open on the one side. And then what you wanna do is press down on this upper section and press up on that blue tool. You'll feel it kind of click over. There's a spring inside. You'll feel it open that spring up. And then with a little bit of pressure on this blue tool to hold it up, you just wanna slowly pull this upper thing, this fuel line off like that. Now, make sure that you have a rag here. There will be a little bit of fuel that comes out. And for us, this has been, I don't know, a couple days since we started. I only throw in a little bit of time here and there on it. So as you can see, there was no pressure. If you shut the car off and 3 minutes later you go to pull this line, it's gonna have a whole whack load of pressure in there, and you're gonna get fuel all over. So just beware. This is the tool here, and you can see how it springs open. All you wanna do is pop it over top. Here, let me move this. Pop it over top here. It'll spring open, pop it down, and then just push it up. It's gonna hit that collar right there, and that's what you're trying to pop that spring over top of. That's what this does. Okay, so now that we have the fuel line off, we're going to take a rag, and I'm going to put a rag around the end of this, and we're gonna tape it, and I'm gonna tape the end of this fuel line so nothing goes down in there and nothing gets up in here for the rest of the install. All right, so you heard me mention we're gonna tape these off. You can see the tape on both sides here just to make sure that no dust, dirt, or anything goes in that for the remainder of the job. We pulled the wiring harness down to the bottom side of this where it's gonna end up living. And now it's time to get this intermediate fuel line right here off. So we have one 10mm socket here from the valve cover, and then the exact same style connector is right down here in the valley of the engine. So what you do is pop this clip here, you pull up on would be the front end, like at the front bumper. You pop that up and over, it slides backward, and there you go. That's your safety clip to make sure that this doesn't pop out when you're driving. You need one 10mm wrench or socket here. Goes through the valve cover, and that's going to pull the top line of that, or the top side of that hose off. And now we are going to use the exact same blue tool to pop off that fuel line. Like I said, it snaps over, so I'm just going to put it up on top, press down, it's snapped into place. We're going to get our old rag here underneath, so if any fuel comes out, we're going to capture that. Press inward toward the back of the car, press toward the front of the car with the blue tool, and then you can slowly rotate and pull this hose off. There you go, that's as fast as it goes. So that fuel line's off. And same thing again, I'm going to take some electrical tape. I'm going to run it on this side. Even though this piece is discarded, I'm going to run some electrical tape on that, a little bit of fuel in there, and I'm going to do the same on the other side just to make sure no dust gets in. Even if it's 2, 3, 4 steps, it's always good practice just to have them sealed up so nothing gets down in there, and a lot cheaper to do it this way. So the next thing we need to do is get the supercharger prep to go on. As you can see, we took the bolts off the perimeter here to take the upper cover off. We had to come out to the front of it, and you take off these 3 bolts, 1, 2, 3, that pulls your coolant in and out for the intercooler brick off of the right side. There's one over here, that's off of the left side. And now we went forward and took out 1, 2, 3 bolts down each side for the intercooler. And we're gonna lift the intercooler bricks out, set them on a piece of cardboard so they don't get damaged, and we're gonna move forward and put the throttle body adapter in place here, and we're about ready to drop it on. The important thing about this is you want to pull up evenly. So I have 2 screwdrivers, one on each end, and it's just going to help me get under that lip to pull these up. That's your brick right there. You definitely don't want to drop it or damage this at all, so be very careful. Same thing on this end. Just have 2 small screwdrivers here, and it doesn't take much to get underneath it. Course, now that I'm talking about it. Okay, so we're underneath, and what I do is press down just a little bit with my thumb, so I'm pressing it down onto that screwdriver so it can't fall off. Okay, now that those are removed, you can see the inlet ports down here in the bottom, and you have your screws here for where, or your bolt holes I should say, where that's going to bolt to the cylinder head. So we're gonna get ready. We need 3 bolts and a stud for the throttle body adapter to put it on. All right, so we have our throttle body inlet here, or the adapter I should say. You have an O-ring that goes in this groove all the way around. Just run your finger and make sure that that's seated down. There's 3 bolts and 1 stud that go in here. This stud goes in this lower left corner. So start to thread that stud in. You're gonna put Loctite on both sides. There you go. And now you're gonna put 3 bolts in the remaining holes. This lower one is kind of tricky here. So what I usually do is put the bolt in there first. It'll slip onto the stud you just put in, helping you line up this one. And you don't have to fight with it down underneath the supercharger. That stud, make sure that there's at least a couple threads sticking out outward of that nut, but you want to make sure that it's also in far enough that, you know, it's not half a thread into the casting and 10 threads sticking out that you're not using. So usually what I'll do is put it in so that there's roughly 3 or 4 threads sticking out of the nut, and then tighten it down. These 4 bolts are going to get tightened to 106 inch-pounds, not foot-pounds, it's inch-pounds. It's a very small torque wrench, usually a 3/8 drive, and it will click very softly, so you have to be paying attention when you go to tighten it. There you go. Now we're going to flip it over and do the bottom. So get a buddy to help you, and now that this is stripped of the 2 intercoolers, you can go ahead and drop it down on the motor. Make sure that when you come in, you kind of go underneath this cowl, kind of back like this, because it does stick underneath the cowl a little bit. You have your bolts here. There's 5 that go down each side. You put the little washer on with the rubber insert and a little bit of grease, and then some blue Loctite. Like I said, there's 5 that go down each side. Make sure you don't drop any of these down those intake ports. So you're just gonna go through and drop 5 of them down in place on both sides. What I usually do is drop them in place, and then I'll wiggle the supercharger front to back, and they'll drop into the hole that you're gonna start threading. And you know that you're in place and ready to go. These bolts as well get tightened to the 106 inch-pounds, the same thing that we just used on the throttle body adapter. So your torque wrench should already be set. And you're gonna wanna walk these up. You want 3 different steps. So you're gonna walk them, you know, I don't know, 50, 80, 106. and then you'll be at your torque and ready to go. So we just went ahead and torqued up the 10 bolts that hold the supercharger down to the engine. The next step is dropping back in our intercoolers. What you're gonna do is try and hold it flat. Drop this thing down. And if you stick your finger through this front port, you can kinda ease it down in the front anyways. And it's just gonna drop in just like that. Now, there's 3 M5 bolts right here. So we're gonna shoot 90, that's roughly the middle. So we'll torque these 3 up to 90, and again, same thing like anything else that you do, start in the middle, work your way out. So we'll go here, here, and here. Once we're done that, we're gonna repeat the other side, and we're about ready to drop the cover back on. So here's another tip. We just went ahead and dropped this supercharger down like we showed you. We threw the intercoolers in and we put our ports on the front to connect our water hoses. On step 92, it tells you to grab this manifold absolute pressure sensor, where it used to go in on the driver's side here about halfway up the intake. Now it's on the back side of the supercharger. So 92 tells you to grab it. 93 and 94. 93 tells you to clip it in right here, which is obviously super easy. 94 now says for you to clip it in, and it's back here underneath this cowl. So I don't know why you wouldn't clip that in when it's out on the bench, and before you go ahead and put this whole entire thing on, just leave the harness flipped over and then put it in the car, and you just make this one clip out here. It took me maybe 10 or 15 minutes, but it cut my hands up pretty good, and it just kind of drove me nuts. So if you're going to be putting this on your car, clip this harness in the back first, and then put the supercharger down on the car to save yourself some grief. So next on the to-do list is pull off the MAF sensor right here. We need to add this extension harness in. So that end's going to clip into there. This female end is going to come all the way down this black hose right here, all the way to there. And we have one more plug on this harness, and it's going to go all the way down here to the bottom right here on this gray clip. So to get started, we're going to pull this zip tie on the stock car's MAF. We need this little 90-degree elbow here, and this just slides off. So we got the clip off that they want off the stock harness here, and they want it put on this new harness. So you need to fold these wires down kind of 90 degrees. And then this is your clip. So the clip here slides over top like this and will snap in place. There you go. There you go. So what happens is when you look at the side of it, there's a little tooth right here. You can raise this little, see how I raise that little section? And if you go back to the other side, you raise this little section as well, and now you can slide this upper cover off. This middle piece and this bottom piece stay in place, and just this top piece goes. And then when you push it back on, the new one, just make sure that there's a little tooth right there, that tooth is engaged into it. So we're going to write this right up like this. We're going to put this one like this. And then this guy needs to come all the way down here. So this is your PCV hose now, and that port that we hammered in on the valley there, this hose needs to go from there all the way up around like this and then down into this port. And this is going to make a vacuum which sucks through the hose, and it sucks out, pressure in the crankcase. Now, this hose comes supplied in the kit You put these two little black spring clamps on that you see that I have here, but this is a one-way valve, and you need to be 100% sure that it's going to flow the right direction. If it doesn't, you're going to have crankcase pressure in your motor, and it's not going to end up living very long. So the easiest way to check on which way it goes is just blow through it. I have pressure coming out this end and nothing going out this way. So we know that we need the air to go through this side from the valley of the engine and up this way into this port here to get sucked back in. So make sure that the short end of this goes down on the valley and the long end goes up here. But who knows, sometime in manufacturing, somebody could have flipped this thing around, and you don't want to take your motor for chance. So just blow through it real quick and make sure that's the way you want to do it. Let's go ahead and get it installed. Okay, that's all the way down there. And this comes all the way up here. Make sure when you put that hose on, it's fully seated all the way down to this little nipple here. And we already have our spring clamp installed, so we'll just squeeze that, bring it down and pop it on. This one I put way up here. We'll just grab it with a pair of pliers and shove it all the way down in place. Aesthetically, I think that's going to look nice. I just tapped it around, as you can see. So this is the part of the clamp that you're going to see, and not those corny little parts that you grab on. We're going to do the same thing on the bottom. You just want to make sure that they're not going to be, you know, hitting a wire or anything that they could chafe on and cause any issues down the road. Next step, now that we have the map sensor harness in, this was tucked down nice, I just pulled it up out of the way. We need to go right down here, there's a bolt. We're gonna undo that bolt, it holds the fuse box in. This bracket goes in this direction, facing in toward the driver's seat and forward. We're gonna take that nut off, put the bracket on, put the nut back on here and pull this down. This is your harness for your intercooler. So first step is pull off your fuse cover here. We're going to drop a fuse into that, put the cover back on, and then we're going to start connecting this thing up. So we got our little fuse here. It's a 15 amp. Drop that in here like this, and then we're going to put the cover back on. That's weather tight. You can see that little green gasket here. Right there, that keeps the weather out of this cap, which stops it from going in the fuse, so you don't have to worry about water or anything getting inside. So we just went ahead and installed our bracket that I'm pointing to with the screwdriver. That holds the relay right here that fires up the pump to run your intercooler circuit. This is the fuse holder that we just put the fuse into. You have a trigger wire, this small little one right here. So that now plugs into the provided harness. Not this wire, but the next one down on the alternator. If you pull this rubber boot off, there's a nut inside with a 13mm wrench you're gonna use. Pull that stud off, and that's where you put your trigger wire. And then lastly, you need a ground. And you get that right beside this air box, all the way down at the bottom. So what we're going to do now is all of the wiring in here, I just have kind of loosely laid. Usually what I'll do on a project like this is run all of the wiring roughly where it has to go, and then I'll come back and I'll zip tie it all together and take it all and make it all look nice and route it out of the way. The main two that you need to worry about right now is this MAF wire right here. You don't want it to get caught in the alternator. And then this harness right here is down underneath the pulley, but this is the one that's going to go down to the pump. And the same thing, you want to make sure it doesn't get caught in that belt. So you're going to zip tie both of those to this air conditioning steel line here, which will definitely keep it away from the belt, and everything's out of harm's way. Let's go ahead and get that done. So we just took 10 or 15 minutes and went around and zip tied up all of the wiring to where it looks nice. I did go on this PCV hose here. I showed you earlier it was a little bit shorter on the bottom than it was up here. I ended up making that a bit shorter again, just so this tucks in nice around here and it looks all nice instead of kind of poking up. Next thing on the list here is putting the throttle body back on. So this is the stock throttle body. It's got an O-ring here. Same thing, just run your finger, make sure that that's sit down in the bottom of the groove. And we are going to start these bolts by hand. I got a fuel line here now, so that's going to push down a little bit. There you go, that one started. So this bottom one here started, and this last bottom corner here. Now we are using the stock throttle body and stock bolts that came out of that throttle body. These will get torqued down to 106 inch-pounds, the same as the supercharger got bolted down to the head. And while we're right here, same thing, we're going to take our supplied bolts, put a little bit of the supplied Loctite on, and we are going to install our supercharger pulley like this. So same thing, that gets torqued down to 106 inch-pounds, and that's why we're going to do it at the same time. We'll set the torque wrench up once and do the both. So usually what I'll do is just roll one of the bolts right to the top, and that'll get me really close like that, so you don't have to hunt around for it too much. Again, just a little bit of Loctite on each one of these bolts. Don't get too crazy in case you ever want to change pulley and up your boost some more. But you want enough that the pulley's not going to come off. Just a little dab on it. There you go. And we're just going to take our drill here, and we are going to take our drill here and just kind of snug these up. I'm not going to put any pressure, as you can see, just enough to get them touched down. Just save some time from doing it by hand. Same thing here. This fuel line back here has got to be moved. Here we go. There you go. So we have these. We're going to go back right now and tighten them. Best way to do this one is take your new supercharger belt, wrap it around the pulley, and you can hold it by hand and just crack those down tight. Same thing as before. Do a cross pattern on here just to make sure it goes down smooth. Flat, I should say. Okay, now we're going to take our belt and wrap it like this, and I just pull it kind of snug, and now you can tighten this. The other alternative, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, is just lightly touch down the bolts like you saw us do, and then wait until you put the belt and everything on. And once the belt is on with the tensioner on it, that'll give a lot of pressure on here, and you'll be able to take these back out, put Loctite, and do this process. Problem with that is if you forget to take them back out and Loctite them, there's no Loctite on it. So I usually do it that way. As soon as the pulley's on, torque it up with the belt like I just did. It's not hard, and now you know that this thing is done and ready to go, so you don't have to come back. We'll throw in our one clip over here for the throttle body, since it's drive-by-wire, right there. And we're ready for the next step, guys. We're getting real close now to dropping the cover on this and moving underneath to do the crank pulley, the damper, and then put in our heat exchangers and our pump. Okay, so we are here now. Everything is zip tied, throttle body's on, blower pulley is on. Now we're gonna drop the cover down in place. If you look at the back side of this cover, again, same thing as we've been talking about multiple times. There's a O-ring seal that goes all the way around. You wanna make sure, just run your finger, that it's uniform down inside there. There's not one chunk of it that's pumped up or whatever, or it's not outside. When you go to clamp this thing down, it's not gonna seal. If you don't have a seal here, you will have zero boost, which means all of this was for nothing. So make sure that that's good. All the bolts right now I have out of this thing, and the reason is we are going to Loctite every one of the bolts that drops around this thing with blue medium strength. So this gets dropped down in place here. You can see that I removed the two Magnuson beauty plates here that go on, and that's because there's 4 bolts in the center. So we're gonna put those 4 bolts in. They're a little bit longer than the rest. Loctite those, and then we'll, the back of the beauty plate here has a sticker on it, like an emblem tape. We'll bring you back, we'll undo those, stick it down, put the 4 bolts in, and the top of this thing is just about done. So you can see here, we're back at the bench. We have the EVAP hose, and we need to modify this a little bit. So we're gonna cut right here, we're gonna cut right here, and we're gonna cut right here, and we're gonna discard this piece of hose and this center piece of hose. The way you wanna do that is just take a knife and cut just one line like this. And you can see where it's bumped out to. If you just stop just before it's bumped out, if needed, you can reuse this hose again. Chances are we're not going to, but it's just good practice. I've had them before where you had to shorten it, and that's how you need to do it. So what we're gonna do is just cut this. Like I said, just stop just before the bumped out section. And we'll move down here. We're gonna cut this section as well. Make sure you have a sharp knife for this. It's not super hard to cut through, but you're kind of close to your fingers and stuff, so sharp knife will do the work without a ton of pushing, and the chance of you cutting your hand is far less. So there you go. Now you can twist them, and you can see that pops right off. Twist that one, that pops right off. Twist that one, and that pops right off. So we want to keep this section, and we want to keep that. That's the way that that was oriented. Same thing as before, it's a check valve, so make sure you know which way it flows. So now we're going to get this piece of hose that was supplied in the kit, and we want to cut 2 inches off the end of it. So just grab a tape measure. I'm going to grab my hose cutters here. If you don't have a set of these, a knife will do just fine. What I do is line it up behind here and just kind of cut through. These things just are super quick. So there you go, nice clean cut. And we want to put our 2-inch piece of hose right here. You know what we're going to do is, if you hit it with a little bit of brake clean, it will help you get it down over these teeth. and then the brake clean evaporates. And it's not going to stay in there, so the hose isn't going to come off. So there you go, just keep twisting. You can get that thing set up in place. And on our check valve, one side has a white dot. I know that the white dot was facing here before, so we want the white dot again to be facing inside. Hit it with another shot of brake clean. Now, shove this one in. There you go. So that's already modified there. Next, what we want to do is grab a piece of our mesh here. This was supplied in the kit, and we want to put it down over top of the remaining chunk of that hose that we haven't cut yet. So this stuff, if you squeeze it together, you can see how it grows in size. So what you want to do is kind of pull it down like this, just push it up over the end, and then if you can see that this is all larger, if you just run your finger like this, it'll work its way down the hose. So it's a real quick way just to, you just kind of want to bunch it up on here. It goes pretty quick, this stuff is pretty good. Oh, went too far. So now what we're going to do is this goes on the end here, hit it with another shot of brake clean. Press it on. Again, you just want to bottom that thing out. Like I said, we went a little bit too far. We're just going to push a little bit back. So there you go. That's in place like that. Okay, now we have this connector here, and it's got the barbs on the end. We are going to put it on this far side down here. It appears to me that this loom is a little long, so I'm going to pull it all the way here, and we're going to cut it about half an inch, 3/4 of an inch past. Now this stuff, when you cut it, you can see it frays there. Just hit it real quick with a lighter. So you have your lighter, and you will just melt that edge. Just melt just the edge. You don't want to get all crazy with it. But if you melt that edge like that, much like a rope, it'll stop it from fraying out everywhere. So now you can pull this way back. We're going to hit this, a little bit of brake clean. And push this guy in. Again, make sure that that bottoms out. And now, same thing as before, we can just run this back down on the hose. And you cut it about 1/2 inch long, and look at that. Works out just as you wanted. So now that we have this modified, we threw a little bit of our grease on that barb that goes into the brake booster. We're going to pop that back into the brake booster by just pushing, connect the wiring harness, and this right here plugs in the vacuum pump. So let's get that hooked up. Okay, we're into the booster. We're into the vacuum pump. And lastly, we're going to connect our clip. And now this piece of the hose, we're going to run up here. And this comes all the way forward and snakes right over to the throttle body adapter that goes on there. Again, we'll come back and zip tie this all up out of the way. I already have some zip ties here, and we will tuck it all up nice once we get the final hoses on.
Alright, so we are looking down the driver's side now, and we're trying to get to this damper pulley, as you can see there. To get to that pulley, we need to remove the ABS, which is right to the left of my hand, and we need to remove the electric power steering wiring, which that big red wire right there. And what we're going to do is loosen the rack, slide it forward, and that'll help gain some clearance down to that harmonic damper. So you can do it from the top, but probably be pretty hard. So lucky enough we have the hoist here. We're going to lift the car up and we are going to attack it from the bottom. Now that's the hood strut there that you just saw me move out of the way. They tell you to take it off in the manual, but to be honest, I don't think you have to do that and use that wooden stick like we did. But let's continue on. So here you have one bolt that goes up and that pulls the sway bar in, and then you have this one bolt right here. So we're going to pull those two. You have that one bolt that I'm pointing to right up at the top, and that's your rack bolt. And then you have the two stacked top and bottom there, right to the left of where we just took that bolt out. And that is for your ABS module. So once you get those out, we're going to move to the other side. This is the wiring harness that I dropped down for the intercooler pump. So that's just kind of loose right now. I left it loose like that so we could get from the bottom and zip tie it up out of the way and make sure that everything, wasn't going to hit the belt or crawl up into the fans or anything like that. So you'll kind of just have to work around it. But same thing, we have the one bolt that goes up and the two that go fore and aft in the vehicle. So we're going to pull that out, and that's going to let us move that sway bar down out of the way and pull the power steering rack forward to let us gain some clearance to get that damper pulley out. So now we're going to attack these two bolts right here, and that's your ABS module. So once you have the wiring disconnected, there's one little wiring clip right here that you can see that kind of pops onto that bracket. Pull that out, and then we're going to pull these two bolts here, and we can pull the ABS module forward. That'll give us a little bit of room to pull that rack. Last but not least, we want to throw our hands right around the outside here, and you're going to pull the sway bar end link. We chose to pull the sway bar end link on the bottom of it, which goes to the spindle, or the A-arm I should say. Just it was easier for us to get to that way. So what you need is a really low profile damper puller. As you can see here, it's really tight in there. So you're going to need the smallest low profile puller that you can find. We found this one. I did buy this one off of Amazon, and I will put a link in the description below for it. So we'll speed this up, but we're just going to go ahead and keep pulling on that. You'll see that we're able to pull it out.
So this harmonic damper puller, I guess you would say, is one that I got off Amazon. I'll put the affiliate link in the description below. You're going to need one of these to pull this one off because it's so tight up there between the rack and the fan for the radiator and obviously this pulley. So what you do is these three little jaws have a tooth here that grips in the damper. And then there's a rod that goes down into the crank and it goes into the end of this. You can see that little hole. And the rod presses inside the crank and you just screw this thing in and it pulls the pulley off. So like I said, I got a couple different ones of these. This one is the smallest, most compact one that I have, and it was still a little bit big for down there. So yeah, I'll put the link in the description below. You're gonna need one if you want to do this thing. We just got the damper installed, the new damper. We did it from the top, but we had to come under here and lock the flywheel. There's two little covers, one on each side of the motor right here, and we loosened that, shoved a screwdriver in and pried the flywheel so that it wouldn't move, as this car's an automatic. And I was up top, torqued down that damper bolt. So the first one you have to do is put the new pulley on with the install tool, which we'll link in the description below. You tighten that bolt to 240 foot-pounds. Take that bolt out and discard it. That's the old stock bolt that you're using. You put the new bolt in, torque it to 111 foot-pounds, loosen it back off, torque it back into 59 foot-pounds, and then you do 125 degrees rotational, and that's your final torque rating. So now that that's done, we need to go ahead and install the rack back into place. We had two bolts that we popped out. we need to put the sway bar back in, the 3 bolts on each side, and we can go up to the top, plug back in the ABS module, and these wires that you see hanging down here, which is your electric power steering. Let's go ahead, get that done, and finish up this car. All right, so we got everything done underneath the car. We got our wiring hooked up for the power steering. We got our ABS module hooked back up, the one wiring harness over here on the frame rail. Now it's time to put in our pulley bracket, and that's going to go on the driver's side here. On the front of the cylinder head, these 2 M10 bolts up on the top. Then you have 2 M8 bolts that go into this bracket on the block, and you have one that goes in sideways here around, you know, just in the back of that web. So what I'm going to do is throw one of these bolts in, just with, you know, 1 or 2 threads on it. This stuff is going to be Loctited, so all I want to do is have this bolt hold the bracket so we can Loctite and install the other stuff. So just make sure you put a little dab of Loctite. We're using blue Loctite 243 on your bolt. I'm going to pull these 2 wiring harnesses back just a little bit so we can get this in place. Here you go. This is going to be for a couple idler pulleys for your supercharger belt. Now we have a couple M8s right here. Same thing, just a dab of Loctite. These M8s go on the bottom. Like usual, make sure that you kind of finger tight everything. Get all the bolts in finger tight before you tighten up any, in case the bracket's not fully aligned. And lastly, the one on the back side, it goes in from driver side to passenger side, sideways in the vehicle. All right, so all of our bolts are now finger tight. I did have to loosen one bolt here on the side that holds these 2 large wiring harnesses, so we're going to tighten up our bolts on these first, and then we're going to go back and put that bolt in to hold the wiring harness out of the way once this bracket's snug. All right, so the 2 small M8s right here get torqued to 18, as well as the one on the side, and the M10s go to 25 foot-pounds. Moving right along, we got our bracket tightened down now. Now is time for the new tensioner, and that tensioner is going to go 1, 2, 3 bolts. Here, I can do it with my hand out of the way. 1, 2, 3, and you're going to use these M8 by 50s. Make sure, same thing, you throw a little dab of Loctite on these before you drive them home. Loctite. This going in here. We'll finger tight them, and these are going to get torqued to 25 foot-pounds. So there you go. There's one. Two. and 3. We'll grab our torque wrench right now. Set for 25. And torque these up. All right, so we're back here. We got our 2 pulleys. You have this smooth one on the bottom, ribbed one here on the top, and then we have one that's gonna go right here under the water pump, or under the supercharger pulley, and this one here is gonna go just over to the passenger side. So we got the belts on the top there last night. That's where we called it a night. We're back out here now, and we had to cut 2 little holes in right here in the bottom of the duct that goes into the radiator. Make sure when you do that, the radiator is very close right there. Make sure that, you know, you're taking a little bit of time. We're gonna install these 2 brackets. There's 1 bolt here and 1 bolt here. And these things fish up and over top, and then they kind of pop down. So you want to fish it in from the front and kind of roll it like that, and then just slide it over and line up your bolt hole. So let's do it over here real quick. This is going to roll down just like that, and then that's going to slide over. Throw your 2 bolts back in with your 10mm socket, and we're on to the next step. So if you use the template which lines up on this hole and this hole, the holes that you cut in the duct there should line up with the brackets you just put on. Now that that's done, let's run back to the bench. We're gonna pre-assemble those low temp radiators and get those ready to install. So here's the rest of our parts and a couple tools, don't mind those. We're gonna focus right now on the low temp radiators. So this comes in 2 pieces, and we need to put the top one into the bottom. As you can see here, it's got a little nipple, and that's gonna go into this port. But first we need to install 2 O-rings, 1, 2. So what you wanna do is put a little bit of this lube that they give you on your finger, and you just wanna run it around that O-ring. 1, it's gonna help it stick into that bore, and 2, it's gonna lube up just a little bit so that when you press these 2 together, it doesn't cut the O-ring and cause a leak. So you kind of just make it all slippery and then try to push it down in here. Sometimes it helps if you have a little pick or a screwdriver. Let me just get some of this on this other one here. Close this back up. Grab my pick, and I can help assist that into the location that I need it. So as you can see here, half of it's in the top bore, and half of it's in the bottom. We're gonna try and get this one into this top bore, and then the next one will kind of roll past it. Don't drop it down in there. That's about the only advice I can give you here. There you go. So that one, as you can see, we just popped it into that top bore. There's another bore underneath. And now that that one's in, we're gonna push the second O-ring past it, down into that second bore location. So usually what I'll do is start pushing it down, and I'll just take my pick and kind of pull it in one side so it like sits inside that bore, and then start pushing the other side. That way it can't fall all the way down into the radiator. It's a little tricky, but you can do it. Move over to this side, pinching in what's already in there with my finger so it doesn't pop out, and then just kind of walking it around. There you go. So let me wipe this off real quick. There you go. It's as easy as that. You have one O-ring in the top bore, one O-ring in the bottom, and they have a little bit of lube on them so you can slide these things together. Get this off my fingers here. Now, the next step is going to be flipping these over before we put it together. Flip these over, and what you want to do is wipe down this surface right here on both sides with a little bit of alcohol. And we're going to install this foam tape that's supplied in the kit here, 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 and here. I'll go ahead and cut. You guys don't need to watch how to do that. I'm just going to wipe it, cut it, stick it down, and I'll bring you back when we're done. All right, so we got the foam here, 1, 2, 3, 4. There was a little chunk left over, so since these are gonna push together, 1, 2, 3 little pieces in there, so when these squish together, you got a little bit of cushion in there. Now, next thing we wanna do is we wanna grab this lower one, and you can see, let me move this one out of the way. You can see this is the lower by those 2 mounting pins. These are gonna go into those 2 brackets we just put on. So grab a little bit of this lube right here. Throw a little bit on your finger, and again, same thing, just kind of work it around so it'll pop through that grommet that's in that bracket a little easier. And then we're going to run over to the car, throw this in place, and we're going to come back, and this one here, remember I was telling you that this port went down into those 2 O-rings? Same thing. I know we lubed up the O-ring, but we're going to put a little bit on here like this, and that'll just help this thing pop into place. So now everything is lubed, we're ready to go and start sliding these things in. Let's run over to the car and do that. So we're here at the front of the car again. This thing is going to slide in like this and kind of pull backward. The foam that we put on the back is going to go against the radiator that's already in there. So let's go and fish this down in here. And this should just pop down into those 2 brackets. It's going to be a little bit of a chore because it's angled. It's going to be a little bit of a chore to kind of push as you're curling forward so it clips down in there. So let me go ahead and do this. I got to go up a little bit with the hoist, and I'll bring you right back. So there you go. What I did was I pulled that bracket underneath just down a little bit. I was able to push that tab down and then push that bracket back up to make sure that I had good engagement. Now that's sitting in here, as you can see. We have this one tab right here that's going to come up to the center, and that's, we already had a hole cut there, so it's not a big deal. We want to get this upper low temp radiator in, so we're going to kind of fish it up like this and then pull it back down so that that pipe goes into those 2 O-rings. Just be careful, you don't want to smack up that factory radiator in there when you're trying to fish this thing around. There we go. And then we're going to pull this down like that. And now you can see, if I get out of your light, now you can see that I was able to pull that down on the side. There's a little tab so that these touch. Once we put the bolt in there, it'll kind of pinch it together a little bit better. But as you can see, we're well on our way now. Let's continue. All right, so we got these ready to go. We need to put one bolt in this side here like I showed you earlier, and we need to attach our adapter to go 90 degrees through the 2 holes that we cut and out so we can attach our hoses. Make sure you put a little bit of the lube on those 2 O-rings there, and we have our bolts right here. These are a Allen wrench, and you want to make sure, again, like usual, drop a dab of Loctite on them so that you don't have to worry about them coming out later. There you go, like usual. You can kind of thread it in. Don't torque it all the way down until you have all the bolts in. So that should be sufficient for now. And then now that's the very top one. I started there for a reason. We're gonna drop all the way down to the very bottom, and we're gonna do that. It's a little bit easier to line stuff up when you use the furthest points. The middle two will line up a lot easier if you do it this way. So there we go. And same thing, just kind of run it in. This Allen wrench has a ball on the end, which is helpful because we're not perfectly straight onto it. Okay, and then our two center ones. We'll go ahead and get those in. Just make sure that you're not dropping a bunch of stuff here onto this radiator there. I'm assuming that that one's a oil cooler, but I could be wrong. You just don't want to bend up all the fins and get it all gross, right? You're putting this on a newer car, so take a little bit of extra time. If you're worried about it, you can cut a piece of cardboard, lay a piece of cardboard on the top. For us, we're gonna get everything that we need to do here complete, and then we're gonna grab the air gun. We're just gonna blow out all the little plastic shavings from cutting these couple holes here before we put the bumper back on and button the car back up. I wanna give the car back to the customer with a bunch of plastic chips and shavings and stuff down in there. Okay, so all of our bolts here are snug now. Now you can go ahead and tighten them down. That's gonna hold, these 4 bolts here are gonna hold the driver's side of these radiators together. And then you have that one pinch bolt there on the passenger side. That's gonna hold that side of it together. So we are going to leave those just snug. And I'm going to jump to the other side, get this one in, and then we'll go back and torque them up. So you got a pretty good angle of it here. Right here, the bolt's going to go downward, the bottom's threaded, and the top's a clearance hole. So we're going to try and fish this down into there, like that. Get a couple turns on it with my fingers. So this is our intercooler pump here. This is what's going to pump the coolant from the intercoolers up on top of the engine down to that radiator that we just installed. And you put it in this rubber sleeve, and then the bracket is cut into this, I don't know, we'll say it's a W shape, and that kind of slips down on, and that's all that there is. So what you need to do is put this little bump here directly pointed opposite where this comes out. So all you want to do is set it up on here like this and pull it around. This rubber sleeve is very tight and it sucks trying to put these on, but you can do it. There you go. So there you go. Let's get this kind of uniform. Okay, so now we're going to run over to the driver's side, put the mount on. It's 2 bolts on the radiator cross member, and then we're going to run the wiring that we dropped down the bottom of the car, I don't know, 45 steps ago. We're just going to run it across, and that plugs in right here. Let's go ahead and get that done. So we put these 2 bolts in here. This is our bracket. The pump is going to slide in here, kind of fish it through, and it'll drop down onto that bracket there. Just like that. And then this is our wiring harness, this gray clip. this is our wiring harness that comes from the passenger side up at that fuse box that we threw down. I just went right against the back side of the electric fan shroud there. We'll zip tie it to that, and then it's going to come up here and clip in the bottom of this pump. Okay, so that's clipped in there. We'll grab some zip ties and zip tie this up out of the way so it doesn't get caught in anything. And I want to put one zip tie up on the passenger side just a little bit higher so that it keeps it far enough away from the serpentine belt we don't have to worry. So the next step, we need to move this ground wire here over to here. Pull out this Christmas tree plug holding the wiring harness, as we're going to mount our new reservoir there for the intercooler. So it's a 13 mil. There you go. 13 mil again. And now we want to combine these two. How can I do that nicely? This in here, like that, and that's going to go like that. There you go. That looks all right. There you go. Leave this bolt out here because we're going to be mounting a bracket there, and we need to use our Christmas tree puller and pull that wiring harness out right here, like that. Now we have access to those two holes. So we went ahead, and this is the bolt hole that we pulled the wire out of, and this front bolt hole is where we pulled out this zip tie. So we put our bracket on, our 3 bolts that hold the reservoir. Make sure to just drop one dab of Loctite on all of those. And what we're going to do is, you can see there's one bolt hole right here as that wiring harness kind of snakes through. Let me get this right out of the way. There's one bolt hole right there, and we want to push this into that hole and then zip tie that on so that this harness can't flap around. So we'll go ahead and get that done, and we're on to hoses. So I just went ahead and cut this long leg 13 inches, or 13 and a half, 7 and a half, 3, and 2.5. Now we need to measure and cut down this leg of these 4 hoses down to 4 inches. So what I did was, I just have my tape measure set up here, and we want to measure from the outside surface out here to 4 inches. This one is about 4.5, so we're going to take half an inch off. Not a ton, but half an inch is half an inch. Okay, so that one's done. Just double check this real quick. Yeah, we're right on. This one is roughly the same thing. And roughly the same thing. So what I'm going to do is just overlay this. I'll mark it. There you go. We're going to do the same thing here. And we are going to start cutting some of this stuff and attaching it all together. So we need 31 inches here. So 31. Put that just like that. We're going to come all the way down here, cut this sucker off. Okay, so we have our 31-inch piece there. We need another piece at 17 inches. Oh, there you go. Okay, 1731. So now what we want to do is take one of these Ys, and you're going to put 17 on one side, 31 on the opposite side. So next up is our hose assembly here. This one goes from the reservoir to the bottom port here and over to the bottom port on the other side. And we're gonna use 2 spring clamps on the supercharger intercooler, and down here at the reservoir gets just a worm clamp. So we're going to squeeze these open and get these things installed. Just went ahead and ran the vent line here from the reservoir, brought it down, a couple zip ties, and it goes into the port on the driver's side there on the top of the LTR. So I just kind of brought it over as nicely as I could, zip tied it with the hood release cable that's from inside the car, and that's done. Next thing on the to-do list is putting the air inlet tube on, and then we can trim this hose and this hose so that it kind of fits the contour of that hose. And we're about ready to jump underneath, button up the LTR, and put the bumper back on. Let's get her done. So we have here, this is the bottom of the hose Y that we put onto the intercoolers up top. That's going to go on the top port here on the LTR, and then you have one last hose that's going to go on the bottom, and that goes over to the pump. This was supposed to be 7.5 inches. I'm going to cut it just a bit shorter because I find that it kind of kinks like this with it being that long. So we'll just plug this guy in here. These are nice OEM style connectors that just clip on just like that. So that one's done, and then this one here is going to push on like that. And now I'm going to go from the side. I'll just trim that where I need it. And we have a hose clamp to throw on, and we're done. So we'll grab the air compressor. I'm going to blow out the little filings here from when we cut the holes in the plastic pieces. And then we're going to throw the bumper back on. And I think, you know, what we're going to do is just take a picture. And I'll say, you know, there's these 5 bolts here. I'll put a little arrow to them, and that's how we're going to do the install of this thing. It's getting pretty late, and I'm ready to just get this thing wrapped up. So yeah, I'll bring you back when we go to start the car. When the bumper's all done, we'll drop the car down, put the wheels back on and everything, and I'll bring you back. We'll do the hood liner, and then yeah, I think that's where we're going to end for tonight. I still have to get the tune to come in from them, and when the tune comes in, obviously we'll have you guys back and do the first initial fire, which for you will be in, I don't know, 5 minutes on this video or 2 minutes or whatever. For us, it'll probably be a day or so. So we'll get the bumper back on and go from there. So now we are going to remove the hood liner. You have two T15 screws right here on the top. You stick your hand under the bottom and you can pull this scoop out, and then you're going to go through and pull out the little Christmas tree plugs with your Christmas tree puller. So let's get those 2 T15s out. There you go. Now we'll be able to grab the bottom of this and pull. There you go. Just drops right out. You can see your clips here. So now what we're going to do is grab our Christmas tree puller and pull out our Christmas trees all around. And once this insulation is out, we're going to put this scoop back on and redo our 2 bolts up so that we don't have any clearance issues. So I just want to go over really quick the hose routing. So this is a 2019, and you have a valve cover port here, your PCV, that is supposed to go all the way back to just behind the dry sump tank on the passenger side. And they want you to use the factory hose, but it kind of goes in this area. It goes kind of right over top of this supercharger pulley. So I tried to tuck it in between these two intercooler lines, and it just didn't work. It didn't really look that good. So what I did was I ran a rubber hose down underneath. I followed this loop here and then all the way up and back. I used factory connectors on both ends, just kind of push the hose into it. So I did that. What's the next thing that I did? Oh, the bypass here. So the bypass has a little vacuum line. It's the same size as this one here, but it kind of looped out right beside the belt and then back to the bypass. So what I did was unhook that, and I went around a wiring harness and then back up, just to kind of keep it way away from the belt. We don't need anything getting tangled in there. And lastly, we did this PCV line here that went from the front of the valve cover here on the passenger side. It connects in the middle and it goes over to the dry sump tank. So now that those are done, we have 2 steps left. One, we have to put in our scoop here, and this goes down here on the radiator, and that's to bring air through, and then it goes up through the hood and it exits. And then we need to fill up the coolant reservoir here for the intercooler with coolant, and then we should be good to try and fire. So we're gonna connect this scoop now. We'll fill this up with some coolant, and we're gonna do our first start. Fingers crossed.
So we're here now, and we are going to do the flash for the computer to tell the car that it now has a supercharger and different injectors and so on and so on. So what we did earlier was they give you this great little manual for the RTD module. It plugs in your OBD2 port just down here under the steering wheel. You get the one cable that runs up to the laptop, and what you do is you read the stock file and you send it over to Magnuson. They do a tune for you based on your VIN number, and then they send it back. So currently we just got it back, and we're gonna go through step by step and make sure that we upload correctly. Okay, so what we did was we went in. You guys can't really see this too well, and I can't get the camera much closer, but what we did was we went up, told it where the file was. We tell it to connect to the car. It tells us that we need 4 credits, which we have. It says to select OK. Are you sure it cannot be undone? The answer is yes. And now it's going to read, or write the computer, I should say. So what we want to do is write the computer. So as you can see, it's kind of moving its way along there. We're at 30%, we're at 61%. So you can hear the car turning on and turning off different modules. It says write completed. Okay, so now we turn the ignition off. You wait 10 seconds, turn it back on again. Okay. So that's it. It tells us cycle the key on and off, and then you can close the window, and after that we're ready to go. So we should be fine with this thing. So now let's unplug the laptop and the RTD. So like I said, it's just a OBD2 on this end, and it has a little I don't know, it's like a Samsung charger port there that goes down to your USB. So now we have that. So we will go throw this on top. I'm going to open the hood again, and now we are going to do our first fire. All right, so what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna reach in and hit the brake pedal and then hit the start button. It should start up, at which time I'll run around the door, look under the hood, and make sure we don't have anything crazy going on. So let's do, actually, you know what? We're gonna do one more check. So we key on. Now let's run around. All right, so here we are
under hood. You can hear the water kind of flowing through here. You can hear the pump on. Let's just pull that. Yep, you can see it flowing through there really well. So that's good. I don't smell any fuel leaks. We don't have any leaks coming down right here on the fuel line. So our coolant's okay, our fuel's okay. Let's come back around the door and we are going to do first fire. So what we're gonna do is brake pedal and hit the button. There you go, fire's right up. Belts are aligned, obviously they're not coming off. Let's drop around this side of the hood. You can hear a little bit of the blower there. Come back around, I don't see any leaks. I don't smell any fuel. Sounds good, idling nicely. So the smoke there that you see on the exhaust is nothing to worry about. It's really cold out here in the garage, so I'm not too worried. Like I said, things running great. Blower install looks good. You know, we don't have any leaks, so I'm gonna call this one a success. I wish there was no snow outside. So there you go. We got this thing fired up. We're gonna let it idle for a couple minutes now. You can see my breath in here. So that's what the smoke that you saw from the back end there when I revved it a couple times. You know, fired right up, sounds real good, really responsive with the throttle. So there's not much more I can ask for at this point. If there was no snow outside, we could probably go take it around the block and just make sure, you know, drivability and everything like that is okay. But I don't see that big of an issue right now. I think fired up, wrote the program fine, so we're gonna call this one a success. And this car is stuck here until I think it's the middle of March. So this was a pretty involved install. You know, it's probably, I don't know, maybe 20 hours into this one. So it's a little longer than what you want to do in one night. For us, we spread it over a couple nights. I got other jobs coming in and out. And you know, we're still trying to build this place. So it took a little longer than what was expected. But you know, before the car came, you know, the customer was already aware of that and everything's fine. So the customer is going to come grab this thing, and once the weather turns nice outside, you know, there's no more snow or anything like that, we'll get him to come back and we'll do you know, kind of a first drive and that kind of stuff. Or maybe we'll go to his place and he can do the first drive when the weather turns nice. He's gonna put it back on the road for the summer. And until then, that's it. Have a good one, and we'll see you on the next project. See ya. Do stuff.